I should obey his voice and let Israel go. I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. He actually spoke the truth when he said, I do not know the Lord. True. He had no relationship with the Lord. He may have known about God, but there's a difference between knowing God and knowing about God. He did not know God. As I said before, these pharaohs are very production-oriented. They want production. They want bricks made. They tell them, hey, make the Hebrews get their own straw. Keep up the same production quota. Well, Moses is kind of taken aback. I think he must have thought that God was going to instantly deliver the people of Israel the first time he spoke to Pharaoh. Moses is going, God, I don't get it. What's happening? He doesn't see God at work. His confidence is kind of shattered. But God reiterates his covenant that he had made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he promises deliverance. But the people of Israel now are bitter and very negative, and they don't want to listen to Moses at this point. Well, God gives Moses and Aaron a couple things they can do before Pharaoh. And God says, throw down your staff, let it become a serpent or a snake. And it's interesting because Aaron's snake swallows up the magician's snakes. This is a direct challenge to Pharaoh's power. The snake was a symbol of Egyptian power. It was on the headdress of a lot of their major figures. So this is the first sparring of our God, the God of the universe, versus their gods. But Pharaoh won't concede. The Hebrew word bela, to swallow, is used only twice. It's used here, and it's used later in chapter 15, where the Red Sea swallows up the Egyptian army. This is a foreshadowing of further manipulations of creation by God. God is basically saying, folks, I am the creator. I created the universe, and any time I wish, I can suspend my laws of creation, my laws of physics, my laws of nature. Creation does God's bidding. God's in control, not Pharaoh. The magicians have to resort to incantations and their secret arts. But Moses and Aaron don't do that. They just obey God, the God who has all the power, the true power. Now God will demonstrate his power in acts, activities. Plague number 1, water to blood. God knew that this would get the attention of the Egyptians because the Nile River was looked upon as a life-giving force. They actually had a river god. They worshiped the river. They were totally dependent on it for irrigation and drinking water. And one of the reasons commentators believe that God turned the Nile River into blood was it was retribution for Pharaoh taking the life of Hebrew children. And it's a preview of things to come. Plague 2, frogs and more frogs. The frogs come up on the land from the water, and it's not like just a frog just here and there. They were so thick you couldn't take a step without stomping on a frog. They were in their cooking pots. They couldn't even make bread without a frog hopping into the bread dough. This was an attack, a direct attack on the Egyptian fertility goddess Heket, which looked like a frog head. The magicians also make frogs come up on the land, which I think is, it's almost comical and stupid. Why would the magicians make the situation worse by bringing yet more frogs onto the land? I think Pharaoh probably had a talk with them later and said, you morons, why did you bring up more frogs? Get rid of them. And they probably said, sorry, Pharaoh, we don't know how to get rid of the frogs. This is the first sign of Pharaoh's weakness. He and the magicians don't know how to get rid of the frogs. So he appeals to Moses. This had to have been a little humbling for Pharaoh to turn to Moses and ask him, would you please get rid of the frogs? Moses pleads with God. God hears Moses' request, and he does. But the land stinks. Just stinks with rotting frogs. There has been some controversy. You know, in these plagues, God tells Moses, go down to the water. When Pharaoh goes down to the water in the morning, what's Pharaoh doing down there at the water? Well, the Hebrew is a little bit obscure. It was a little difficult for me to make the translation, but the way I interpreted the Hebrew, Pharaoh was going down to the water to get into his observation aircraft to fly over the land and check his brickyards and his crops. Egypt is a big land. So he did this each morning. I mean, this is a pretty sophisticated guy. He's a businessman. He's very production-oriented. So there he is by his float plane. I'm sure that's what the Hebrew reads. Plague 3, gnats. Oh, by the way, the plagues go in series or groups of 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 is a special. And the third of each of the series is different from the first 2 in that there is no forewarning. They just happen, boom, abruptly, without forewarning, no instruction. They happen very quickly. Suddenly, we have the plague of the gnats. Something interesting happens here. The magicians cannot duplicate this. And the source of the gnats is dust. Why couldn't the magicians duplicate this? Well, I think it's because this is creation of life. Only God can create life. Satan can take what God has already created and he can corrupt it and do things with it, but he cannot create life. First sign of weakness. Plague 4, the flies. Source is the air. Further introduction of chaos into creation. This is the first time there's no staff used. Neither Aaron nor Moses uses a staff. This is the first time that God makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. There were no flies in the land of Goshen. This plague isn't just a nuisance. It brings destruction upon the land. These were biting flies, gadflies. Again, God is demonstrating his power over his creation. And it's a retribution for Pharaoh's attempt to exterminate the fruitful people of Israel. It's an attack, which was an attack on Israel's God and his creation mandate to be fruitful and multiply. Now, you have to notice how Pharaoh and Moses are changing as we go throughout these plagues. Moses starts out feeling defeated. Moses is sitting pretty low in his saddle there at the beginning, kind of wondering, gosh, God, things aren't going too well here. What's going on? Pharaoh starts out sitting high in the saddle. He's like, ha, ha, ha. Oh, I'll show you, Moses. And as we go through these plagues, it just reverses. Moses gains more and more confidence as we go along. Pharaoh is beginning to weaken. He starts to bargain a little bit in this plague. He says, well, you guys can go just a little ways. Go sacrifice, but don't go too far. He's negotiating. Plague 5. Livestock. This is the second plague in the second series. God distinguishes between his people and the people of Egypt. And it's a harbinger of things to come, even worse. And this is the first plague directed against creation. And it's the first plague to involve death. Now we have the boils. This is the third plague of series 2. No forewarning. Happens very abruptly. These are festering boils. God tells